You enter the room, and before anyone speaks, something in you tightens. Faces are composed, but too carefully. One person looks away, a fraction too soon. Another laughs. Yet the laughter arrives at the wrong moment and disappears without warmth. The rhythm has changed. Even the silence seems to press against your body, as if the room has already said what no one is willing to explain. You know this experience. You have known it so often that being told you imagined it can feel like a denial of your own senses. Something registered, a pattern shifted. Your body noticed what language had not yet made explicit. That recognition matters. But here is the unsettling part. A true sensation does not automatically produce a true interpretation. You may accurately perceive tension and still misunderstand its source. You may feel distance and assume anger. You may detect restraint and name it deception. The first feeling can be meaningful, while the first explanation remains only a possibility. This does not make you foolish, it makes you human. Because perception is never received by an empty observer. You enter with your history, your expectations, your fatigue, your unfinished fears. Perhaps the pressure belongs largely to the people already gathered there. Perhaps an old alarm within you has amplified a minor change. Perhaps someone is expressing a quality you resist in yourself. Perhaps several of these things are happening at once. So the real question is not simply, did I feel something? You did. The deeper questions are, what belongs to the room? What arrived with me? What can be verified? And what must, for now, remain unknown? This is where sensitivity either becomes discernment or hardens into certainty. The work is not to silence what you notice. The work is to separate the signal from the story that rushes in behind it. We will examine 4 contributors that can speak through a single feeling: intuition, which directs attention; vigilance, which searches for danger; projection, which places an inner expectation onto the outer world; and shadow recognition, which reacts when another person carries something painfully familiar. None of these automatically cancels the others. None deserves unquestioned authority. And later, we will return to this room with a grounded practice. Sensation separated from interpretation, interpretation tested where possible, uncertainty admitted where necessary, and action chosen in proportion to what is actually known. For now, hold the distinction. You may be perceptive without being infallible. You may honor the feeling without obeying its first conclusion. Yet when you are repeatedly the first person to notice, that distinction becomes difficult to maintain. One charged room becomes a lifetime of reading every room, and the ability that once made you feel awake can slowly become a burden no one else seems to understand. Perhaps it began long before you had words for it. A familiar voice changed by half a degree. Affection became formal. 2 people insisted everything was fine, while something between them had already begun to separate. You noticed the concealed resentment, the interrupted trust, the careful performance of normality. Then, days or months later, others finally acknowledged what you had felt approaching. Experiences like these leave a mark, not only because you noticed, but because you were often minimized before you were confirmed. You tried to explain, and someone called you dramatic. You named a change, and they accused you of inventing trouble. Eventually, you learned that carrying the impression alone could hurt less than offering it to people who would make you defend your own perception. So you became quieter. This silence may look like withdrawal, but often it is self-protection. If every attempt to describe what you sense ends in doubt, you stop seeking companionship in the experience. You observe privately, you assemble meanings inwardly, and the misunderstood observer becomes an identity. The one who sees, the one who knows, the one who must wait for everyone else to catch up. There is real dignity in refusing to abandon your experience simply because others cannot confirm it. Being affected by small changes does not automatically make you fragile. It may mean that your attention is finely tuned, that subtle contradictions reach you before they become obvious. But sensitivity is a capacity, not a rank. And here lies the shadow that is rarely confessed. Repeated invalidation can produce a compensating pride. If others have made you feel foolish for noticing, certainty can restore what humiliation took away. You begin to believe that they are inattentive while you alone are awake. That disagreement proves their blindness. That later confirmation proves your entire interpretation was correct. This conviction protects you. It also confines you. Because once your dignity depends on being the person who sees what others miss, uncertainty becomes threatening. Correction feels like erasure. A mistaken reading is no longer one human error. It feels like the collapse of the identity that kept you intact. You may defend an interpretation long after the evidence has thinned, not because you are arrogant by nature, but because being wrong has become entangled with being dismissed. Then comes the exhaustion. Every pause must be interpreted. Every atmosphere becomes a puzzle. Every shift in another person appears to require your attention, your management, perhaps even your emotional labor. You do not merely register a mood, you carry it. You do not merely sense strain, you begin preparing to repair what no one has asked you to repair. This is how awareness becomes captivity, not through noticing, but through believing that everything noticed must be decoded, and everything decoded must become your responsibility. Your sensitivity does not need shame. Your certainty does not need worship. What you need is a way to ask, inside each perception, which part of me is speaking now? Is this intuition directing attention, vigilance, searching for danger, projection, supplying an expectation, or shadow recognition, touching what is painfully shared? Before discernment can guide you, these voices must be heard separately, even when they arrive together. The first answer is that no single part of you may be speaking alone. An impression can feel unified, one tightening, one certainty, one immediate sense of knowing while carrying several different sources beneath it. Discernment begins when you allow that complexity without treating it as proof that your sensitivity is false. The first voice is intuition. Intuition is the provisional sense that a pattern matters before you can fully explain why. It notices arrangement, timing, incongruity. It does not necessarily tell you what happened or who is responsible. At its most mature, it says, pay attention. Something here may deserve a closer look. The second voice is vigilance. Vigilance is organized around protection. It scans for danger, rejection, conflict, and instability, because some part of you believes early detection may prevent injury. Its concern is not primarily truth, but safety. It asks, what could go wrong? What must I anticipate? How quickly do I need to respond? This voice is not an enemy. It may have helped you navigate uncertainty when uncertainty carried consequences. But protection can continue searching even when the present has not yet revealed a threat. Vigilance often feels urgent because it is trying to secure you before the evidence is complete. Then there is projection. Projection raises the question of ownership. Could a fear, wish, judgment, or trait that is difficult to recognize within you be assigned too completely to the person before you? Perhaps you expect disapproval and begin finding it everywhere. Perhaps you want distance, but experience only the other person as withdrawing. The outer observation may contain truth, but your inner material can determine which meaning becomes irresistible. Shadow recognition goes deeper. It occurs when another person's behavior touches something in you that you have not willingly accepted as your own. Their vanity, dependence, evasiveness, anger, or hunger for approval disturbs you with unusual force, not always because you share the behavior in the same form, but because it awakens a related possibility you would rather keep outside your self-image. This is why shadow recognition is not the same as projection. Projection may place an expectation onto another person. Shadow recognition may accurately perceive something in them and still provoke you because the same human potential, concealed or transformed, exists within you. Now return to the charged room. The tension may be real. Intuition may register that the social pattern has changed. Vigilance may enlarge the change because instability once preceded pain. Projection may decide that others are judging you. Shadow recognition may react to their concealed hostility because you have not admitted your own resentment. All four can participate in one moment. This framework is not a diagnosis. It is not a supernatural classification, a guarantee that you can enter another mind, or a method for declaring which person secretly feels what. It is a reflective lens, a way of replacing the punishing binary of gift or delusion with better questions. What did I actually notice? Which part of me feels urgency? What expectation am I adding? Why does this particular behavior carry such emotional force? You are not required to choose one source too quickly. The perception may contain an accurate observation, an inherited alarm, and a personal story simultaneously. Complexity does not invalidate you. It asks you to become accountable for interpretation. But one voice requires special caution because it is so easily romanticized. If every intense feeling is crowned as intuition, the entire map collapses. So we must examine intuition more closely, how it directs attention, how certainty takes possession of it, and how a quiet signal becomes a verdict it never actually delivered. Intuition becomes trustworthy not when it speaks with the greatest force, but when you resist forcing it to say more than it has said. Its first movement may be subtle, a change in rhythm, a hesitation, an unfamiliar distance. Then, the body responds. The chest tightens, attention sharpens. Only after this does the mind begin constructing an explanation. These are not the same event. You can notice distance without knowing that someone intends rejection. You can register discomfort without knowing who caused it. The cue may be accurate, the bodily response understandable, and the story mistaken. Discernment depends on keeping these layers separate long enough for reality to offer more information. Imagine receiving an unusually short message from a friend. Something about it feels different. The warmth you expect is absent. The reply seems abrupt. Intuition may rightly direct your attention to that change. But what does the change mean? Your friend may be upset with you. They may also be hurried, exhausted, distracted, preoccupied, or struggling with something they have not disclosed. The signal is real as an experience. The message differed from the familiar pattern. The intention behind it remains unknown. Certainty dislikes that gap. It begins with the short reply and quickly assembles a case. They are withdrawing. They have been resentful for weeks. Their earlier silence now becomes evidence. A neutral remark from yesterday acquires a hidden motive. Soon you are no longer responding to one message. You are defending yourself against an entire relationship crisis created largely through inference. This is where sensitivity can lose its precision. The more elaborate the inner prosecution becomes, the more carefully you must ask, what else has entered the room of interpretation? Is vigilance preparing for abandonment? Is projection supplying the rejection you already feared? Is shadow recognition reacting to your own unspoken wish for distance? Intuition may have opened the inquiry, but it did not necessarily author everything that followed. Mature intuition points. It does not pronounce sentence. It can guide the next honest question. You seem quieter than usual. Is everything all right? It can suggest a measured pause before replying. It can direct you to observe whether the change continues. It may even support a boundary when a pattern becomes clear. But it does not require you to accuse, pursue, withdraw, or declare another person's hidden motives before those motives can be known. The disciplined reframe is simple. I notice this is honest. Therefore, I know you exceeds the available information. That distinction does not weaken your perception. It protects it from being consumed by the need to prove itself. You are allowed to honor an impression without staking your identity on its accuracy. You are allowed to remain curious, to seek context, and to revise your understanding without treating revision as self-betrayal. But why do some impressions refuse this patient stance? Why do they arrive not as invitations to look closer, but as commands to act immediately, commands that tighten the body, multiply danger, and make rest feel impossible? At that change in emotional temperature, intuition may no longer be the only force directing attention. Protection has begun to scan. When protection takes over, attention no longer waits for meaning to emerge. It may search every face for disapproval, every pause for withdrawal, every shift in tone for conflict gathering just beyond sight. One possibility produces three more. The mind rehearses what to say, how to leave, how to soften the atmosphere, how to regain control before anything has actually happened. This is vigilance at work. Its intention is not to deceive you. Its intention is to keep you from being surprised. When uncertainty itself feels dangerous, scanning can resemble safety. If you detect the change early enough, perhaps you can prepare. If you anticipate the rejection, perhaps it will hurt less. If you manage your expression, your words, and the emotional balance around you, perhaps the feared rupture can be prevented. There is intelligence in this protective effort, but intelligence organized around survival does not always produce an accurate account of the present. The difference between intuition and vigilance is not always found in the strength of the sensation. Both may sharpen attention. Both may register in the body. The clearer distinction is functional. What does the impression demand from you? Intuition can remain unfinished. It can notice and wait. Vigilance presses for rehearsal, action, or control. It tells you to explain before you have been questioned, accommodate before anyone has expressed displeasure, withdraw before rejection can occur, or resolve a tension whose meaning is still unclear. It does not merely alert you to a possibility. It appoints you manager of the possible disaster. And that appointment is exhausting. You begin monitoring everyone at once. Who seems uncomfortable? Who has become quieter? Which response will keep the interaction stable? You adjust yourself preemptively, less direct here, more agreeable there, careful not to provoke a reaction you have imagined but not observed. Even when no confrontation comes, you leave depleted, because inwardly you have already prevented 10 of them. This is false responsibility, the belief that noticing a possible danger makes you responsible for controlling every outcome connected to it. Yet, awareness does not create obligation. Another person's mood may not be yours to regulate. An awkward moment may not require rescue. A possibility may not deserve a plan. At the first surge of urgency, ask one compassionate question. Am I receiving information, or am I trying to prevent pain before I know it is coming? Do not use the question to humiliate yourself. Protective alertness is not a moral failure. It may be a sincere attempt to secure what matters, but sincerity does not grant it total authority. The watchman deserves acknowledgement, not command of the entire house. You can thank the warning and still wait. You can prepare for what is plausible without living as though it is inevitable. You can let your body settle before deciding what the moment requires. The part of you that watches everything may be seeking safety, not revealing destiny. And once that is understood, a more uncomfortable question appears. If vigilance is searching for threat, what features does the mind supply to the person across from you? The danger may not be entirely invented, but the face assigned to it may contain something of your own. The mind does not invent every threat it fears, but once vigilance has selected a threatening figure, projection can make that figure absolute. A person no longer seems merely evasive, ambitious, dependent, or controlling. They become the embodiment of the quality itself. Your judgment closes around them because something in what they carry is forbidden, feared, desired, or unacknowledged within you. Emotional charge is the clue. This does not mean that intensity proves projection or that self-examination requires you to distrust your senses. Humility is not self-erasure. Asking, "What belongs to me?" does not mean declaring the other person innocent, denying their behavior, or surrendering a necessary boundary. It means refusing to place yourself outside the scene, as though you alone arrived without history, motive, contradiction, or need. Projection says, "This quality exists entirely over there." Shadow recognition is more difficult because it permits two truths at once. The trait may genuinely appear in the person before you. You may have noticed it accurately, and it may affect you with unusual force, because an unexamined counterpart lives within you, not necessarily in the same form, not necessarily to the same degree, but within the same human territory. Consider someone whose controlling behavior is observable. They interrupt decisions, pressure others toward their preferred outcome, and become agitated when plans change. You do not need to pretend these actions are harmless. You do not need to call domination a misunderstanding merely because you are examining yourself. But why does their behavior occupy your mind long after the encounter? Why does their need for control feel not merely unpleasant, but intolerable? Perhaps, beneath your open-mindedness, you also carry a covert need to manage outcomes. You may not command directly. You may anticipate, persuade gently, arrange circumstances, or become distressed when others choose unpredictably. Their control is visible and forceful. Yours may be concealed beneath helpfulness, caution, or emotional preparation. The forms differ. The theme is shared. This discovery does not erase the distinction between your conduct and theirs. It does something more useful. It restores complexity. You can name what they did, decide what access they should have to you, and still investigate why the encounter reached so deeply into your inner life. The shadow does not prove that your perception is false. It asks why this truth has such power over you. There is another shadow hidden inside the identity of the unusually perceptive person. After years of being doubted, you may begin to experience correction as an attack from those who cannot see. Your sensitivity becomes evidence of greater consciousness. Their disagreement becomes evidence of avoidance. Soon, the one who recognizes everyone else's defenses possesses a perfect defense against recognizing their own. This is spiritualized superiority, and it is especially seductive because it resembles insight. It lets you question every motive except your own. It turns self-knowledge into status and uncertainty into something only less perceptive people require. But mature perception includes the perceiver. It does not reduce you, it enlarges what can be seen. The decisive discovery, then, may not be that you saw through another person. It may be that the encounter allowed you to see into yourself, your fear, your wish, your hidden resemblance, your defended identity. You are not abandoning the outer fact. You are adding the inner fact that gives it disproportionate force. The question now becomes practical. In the living moment, how do you separate what you noticed from what you supplied? Decide what deserves trust, test what remains uncertain, and act without waiting for perfect certainty. Humility must become more than an insight. It must become a method. The method begins by slowing the passage from cue to conclusion, not stopping perception, not arguing with the body, simply creating enough space for what you noticed, what you imagined, and what you choose to become three different things. The first movement is sensation. Name only what was directly available. The silence lasted longer than expected. Their posture became rigid. The words were brief. The pace changed. Your breathing shortened. Remove every hidden motive from the description. Their voice became quieter, is an observation. They were concealing anger, is already more than you know. The second movement is story. State the meaning your mind supplied, but label it honestly. The story I am telling is that they disapprove of me. This language is not a ritual of self-doubt. It externalizes the interpretation, so you can examine it. You still possess the story. The story no longer possesses you. The third movement is source. Ask which contributors may be present. Is intuition directing attention toward a genuine change? Is vigilance demanding immediate protection? Is projection placing an expected rejection onto an ambiguous moment? Is shadow recognition intensifying a quality that touches something unresolved within you? Do not force a pure answer. Several sources may be active, and their mixture does not make the perception useless. The fourth movement is check. When it is appropriate and safe, allow reality to provide more information. Wait and see whether the behavior repeats. Ask a direct question. Notice whether later actions support the impression. Seek context that could widen the field. Verification is not interrogation, and it is not an endless search for evidence to support the first conclusion. It is a willingness to discover that you noticed accurately, interpreted partially, or misunderstood altogether. Then comes the fifth movement, boundary. This is where discernment becomes agency. You may pause a conversation, leave an environment, decline a request, postpone a decision, or wait before responding. You do not need to prove another person's motive before protecting your integrity. A boundary can be based on what is happening to you, what you need, and what conduct you will accept. It need not depend upon a successful prosecution of someone else's character. Return now to the room where something tightened before anyone spoke. Sensation. The interaction is strained, several responses are unusually restrained, and your body has become alert. Story. Something serious has happened, perhaps involving you. Source. Intuition may have registered tension. Vigilance may be preparing for blame. Projection or shadow resonance may be shaping its meaning. Check. Observe. Ask what is needed, and let time reveal what the room cannot yet explain. Boundary. Remain if you choose, step away if necessary, and refuse the assignment of solving an atmosphere whose cause you do not know. The same practice applies to the brief message. You observe its brevity. You notice the rejection story. You consider whether intuition, old alarm, expectation, or some mixture is speaking. Then, you seek clarification or allow further context to emerge before issuing an inward verdict. This is the relief. Uncertainty does not make you powerless. You can act without declaring what another person secretly feels. You can trust a need without worshipping an interpretation. You can remain perceptive without remaining on trial. And the final movement is more than the last step. Boundary is what prevents every perception from consuming your attention. It raises the next question. If you can notice without solving, how much of the world are you still required to watch? Far less than your vigilance has taught you to believe. There is often a hidden contract beneath heightened perception. If you notice discomfort, you must relieve it. If you sense distance, you must explain it. If someone becomes uneasy, you must soften yourself, absorb the strain, or discover what went wrong. The feeling arrives, and obligation follows so quickly that they seem like one event. They are not. Another person's discomfort may deserve compassion. It does not automatically require your intervention. You may care that a room feels strained without becoming the person appointed to restore harmony. You may recognize someone's sadness without carrying it inside your body. You may offer presence, ask a respectful question, or make space for honesty. But care becomes fusion when their emotional state determines your inner stability, and their relief becomes the condition for your own. Compassion stays connected. Fusion loses the boundary between lives. Imagine leaving a gathering where tension was unmistakable. You do not have to tell yourself that nothing happened. You also do not have to carry the gathering home, replay every exchange, assign motives to every glance, and construct a complete theory of who resented whom. You can acknowledge the strain, decide whether anything requires a response from you, and let the unfinished meaning remain where it belongs. Not every signal is a summons. This may initially feel like negligence. If you have built safety around early detection, turning your attention away can resemble blindness. Yet selective attention is not numbness, it is mature agency. The capacity to perceive includes the capacity to decide which perceptions deserve inquiry, which require a boundary, and which can pass without pursuit. You are not less sensitive because you stop investigating. You are becoming less compelled. This restraint also protects the dignity of others. When you speak about what you sense, begin with what you observed and what you need. Describe the change without claiming final knowledge of its cause. Invite correction. Allow another person to tell you that your reading is incomplete, even when your impression remains strong. Intuitive certainty must never become permission to define someone against their own testimony. You can say, "Something feels different between us, and I would like to understand." You cannot ethically turn that feeling into unquestionable ownership of another person's interior life. Their account may not resolve everything. It may even conflict with later behavior. Still, discernment remains open to revision. Domination does not. And here is the unexpected consequence. Boundaries do not dull perception. They often clarify it. When every cue is no longer a personal emergency, urgency stops flooding the field. You can observe without immediately defending, rescuing, accusing, or retreating. The signal becomes smaller, cleaner, more proportionate to what is actually known. This is how sensitivity becomes sustainable. You retain the depth of attention while releasing the impossible occupation of managing every atmosphere. You neither deny what you notice nor obey it automatically. You stand near experience without claiming mastery over it. That is no longer the identity of the isolated seer. It is the beginning of something humbler, steadier, and more accountable. The name for that beginning is witness. The witness does not deny the force of perception. The witness gives it proportion. Intuition may point toward a change. Vigilance may warn that danger is possible. Projection may assign an old expectation to a new face. Shadow may invite recognition of what has been rejected within. Each contributes information. None deserves unquestioned rule. This is the final responsibility of sensitivity. You are not defective because you notice what others overlook, because your body registers strain before explanations arrive, or because subtle changes matter to you. But noticing does not exempt you from humility. You remain responsible for the meanings you create, the claims you make, the actions you take, and the freedom you allow others. The oracle must be right. The witness must be present. Return one last time to that room. Before anyone speaks, you feel the tension. Now, you do not dismiss the sensation, and you do not convert it into prophecy. You recognize that something may belong to the environment, something may have arrived through your history, and both may be operating together. You observe. You remain curious, You ask when inquiry is appropriate. You keep the boundary that protects your integrity, and if no answer comes, you decline to become captive to the question. That is usable perception. You began with the loneliness of seeing first, the exhaustion, the fear of negligence, even the secret pride of believing that awareness separated you from everyone who failed to understand. Then uncertainty entered. Protection revealed its urgency. Projection complicated ownership. Shadow returned the observer to the scene. What once seemed like a simple division between those who see and those who do not became a more demanding path, seeing clearly enough to include your own participation. This is not a loss of power. It is power released from performance. Your gift, if that word remains useful, is not knowing everything. It is learning to stay conscious in the presence of what you notice, to observe deeply without turning impressions into law, to test what can be tested, accept what remains unknown, revise without collapse, and act without violating your limits. Carry this declaration into the next charged encounter. I can notice without assuming, question without abandoning myself, and leave what is not mine. Let it become practice, not another identity to defend. And, if someone you know is exhausted from reading every room, share this reflection with them, not as proof that they belong to a superior class, but as permission to rest, discern, and remain human. Continue exploring this work in the same spirit, not to become infallible, but to become increasingly honest, bounded, and free.